Hello and welcome to Christian Reacts, where I react to Christian content online. And today I'll be reacting to a video titled, In Studio Debate, Is Marriage Bad for Men? Now, to be clear, this is a debate between Pearl Davis and Trent Horn, and their introductions will be introduced in this video. I don't know how much I'm going to react to this, how long, because it's a very long video. But this is in regards to marriage for men in particular. So just to be clear, this is not about the effects of marriage with women, though it'll come up, but it's mainly about the effects of marriage compared to men and how it affects men in the modern age. So let's continue with the video now.
G'day, and welcome to Pints with Aquinas. My name is Matt Fradd. Today we will be debating the resolution, is marriage a bad deal for men? In the affirmative, we
I will speed up a little bit, by the way.
have Pearl Davis, and then in the negative, we have Trent Horn. We're going to have 10-minute opening statements, 5-minute rebuttals, 20-minute cross-examinations, a time of Q&A for 30 minutes, and then 5-minute closings. The reason we wanted to do that is sometimes in these discussions, people interrupt each other, and the person doesn't get to make the case that they'd like to make. So that's why we're doing that. But before we jump into it, I was wondering if you could both tell us a bit about yourself. Pearl, ladies first.
Hi, my name is Pearl. I have the YouTube channel Just Pearly Things. We have 2 million subscribers on there.
Well done.
I've interviewed over 1,000 men and women on marriage, dating, and relationships. I also have a call-in show. I've interviewed people all across the world, from London to Africa to Vegas to California. I'm doing a divorce documentary, so that'll be out in the next year.
Where will that be, do you know?
My website, theaudacitynetwork.com.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Trent Horn. I am an apologist for Catholic Answers, and I am the host of the Council of Trent podcast on YouTube. I'm the author of about a dozen books, and I'm married and blessed with 3 wonderful children.
All right. Well, are you ready?
Yeah.
Whenever you start, I'll click the timer. You've got 10 minutes.
Okay. All right, so I don't know. I'm kind of nervous.
You will do fantastic. These things are always weird. It's always weird to get people into a room.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this debate because I like how there's so many debates out there that are simply just snippets and clips of all these people yelling at each other and shouting out divorces, like 90% of this demographic divorces and this, and there's not really an intellectual study-based debate about marriage. There's the Red Pill Lens, which Pearl Davis is a part of, if those of you don't know. And then Trent Horn, I don't know too much about him, but it sounds like he's more of a Christian traditional type of person, Catholic. So let's see how this goes here.
Oh my gosh.
And time to disagree with each other. This is what my wife and I should do when we argue. You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
I'll moderate that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Take
Sorry.
your time.
I'm going to go. All right. So marriage today is a bad deal for men, meaning that it is more likely to not work out than it is to work out. 51% of those that sign up for marriage are not in a better place. Out of 100 men, at least 50 are not getting a good deal, essentially. I would like to clarify that I am not talking about some religious sect. I am talking about average Americans. On top of that, there's a huge legal risk you are facing as a man. Again, I'm not here to discuss the religiosity of marriage, but I'm here to talk about the outcomes of marriage in 2024, as well as the legal ramifications for getting married.
So first of all, she's talking about only the marriage itself as an institution and not the religious aspect. But I think it's impossible to separate the two, because religion, like marriage in itself, the majority of people that get married are getting married in a church. They're having a ceremony in a church. So you can't separate those two exclusively. But I'm curious to see where she goes from here with this information.
I've interviewed over 1,000 women and men on marriage and relationships, and have been putting together a documentary on family court, and I found that most men have no idea what they are signing up for when they get married. Marriage is objectively a bad deal for men in 2024. What I would consider a bad deal is where the risk outweighs the reward. What I would consider a successful marriage is an obedient wife and staying together for a lifetime. To put it simply, men want sex, silence, and sandwiches from a woman they are attracted to. Unfortunately, women are not.
Okay, so she's simplifying marriage in a very small lens. Now, would I disagree with her that that's what men like? I'm not going to disagree with that. Of course, men are very simple, and if they have a wife that is submissive to what they would like out of the relationship, out of marriage, then that's considered a good marriage for many men. But, however, I think she's not... Now, we'll see if she looks at the responsibilities of the husband at this point in the debate, but she's oversimplifying the role of a woman's job in marriage, I believe.
Not offering that in 2024. Women have zero interest in being wives. Gen Z women rank men.
Again, she never, if you rewind this right here, which I'm not going to do that right now, but she never mentioned the responsibilities of a man in marriage to have a successful marriage. So keep that in mind.
7th on their priority list, coming behind things like education, travel, and experiences. Millennial women are not much better. They rank men as 4th behind their careers, education, and finances. I personally have interviewed over 1,000 women from London to Miami to Vegas and even the suburbs of Chicago. And I can tell you firsthand that most young women have no interest in being wives. This can be shown by women's outcomes and choices.
Okay, so this is an anecdotal experience right here that she's stating. This has nothing to do with just data. She didn't cite any data that said most women don't have no interest in getting married. Sure, I would agree with her that in this era of feminism and this independent woman, independent girl boss type of world we live in, yes, there's many women out there that don't have the interest in getting married, or they want to delay it further in their lives when they could have a fantastic spouse with them along that journey. But again, she needs to state studies that support this argument, because it's a very just a lazy statement to make, in my opinion.
Many men like Trent have been married for years and have no idea what the dating market is like for young people. 1 out of 3 women have had an abortion in the United States. 1 out of 4 women has an STD. 90% of women have been on birth control at some point in their life. 80% of sexually active women will contract HPV at some point in their lifetime.
Wow, that's crazy. Jeez.
The average woman is 5'3" and 170 pounds. On top of that, men can never really know the sexual past of the woman they are marrying. Dating apps have made promiscuity more accessible and easier to hide. Women have a great incentive.
That's true. Promiscuity is very easy to hide if one does choose to do that.
To lie about their sexual past. The CDC reports that the average number of sexual partners for a woman is between 4 and 8. But I can tell you from interviews that I've done that below 10 is considered low nowadays. This is especially crazy considering.
Again, here it is. Now, I can't say that she's wrong about the 4 to 8 metric of women having sexual partners before marriage. But again, if she's going off based off the people she interviewed, that having 10 is considered less, but you can't base it solely off your experience of who you interview. It's very important.
Once a woman has over 5 sexual partners, she is less likely to have a stable marriage. After women have had over 10...
That's true. I wish Pearl stated more studies to show this, to demonstrate that, because that is true. That having more partners, sexual partners before marriage does lead to higher likelihood of divorce, because having a pair bond is more difficult to have.
Sexual partners, the chance of a happy marriage drops to merely 14%. Only 3% of women report waiting for marriage for a religious reason. A quarter of women have a mental illness. Over half of women between the ages of 18 to 29 have at least one tattoo. The average woman has at least $26,000 worth of debt. And on top of that, young women are officially out cheating and out drinking men. That makes marrying a woman today a higher risk than times of the past. But let's look at marriage. What benefits are...
I would agree with her that... Let me slow down a little bit. I will agree with her that marriage is more... is a higher risk today due to the laws and due to the type of women that are out there currently right now, with all the temptations with drinking and drugs and all these things. But I do think these could affect men as well. Like, many men are promiscuous and going to the clubs, going to parties and all that. So I don't think it's simply just with women, but I see that she's doing this because this is about the topic of, is marriage bad for men? So it's not focusing on the troubles and shortcomings of men right now.
Given to men in marriage. 100 years ago, men would have gotten a debt-free virgin who gave him 4+ children and was expected to obey him. Unfortunately, now modern marriage is simply whore management. The majority of women are not known to be obedient wives. How do we know this? From one, we have phrases like, it's cheaper to keep her and happy wife, happy life. If women were so obedient and good wives, why are all of the phrases focused on bending to the will of the woman? On top of...
That's a good point, because feminism has definitely encapsulated our society today to the point of only caring about the happiness of women in a lot of areas. And that's why, with like the idea of having sexless marriages and all of that, or men wanting to have sex more often, it's considered like an odd thing for men to want that, for their needs to be met. But if women's needs aren't met, it meets headlines all of a sudden. So I do agree with her on this point.
With that, we can look at women's choices during marriage. Some common problems that I have found is that women gain a significant amount of weight in marriage. On average, women gain 24 pounds within the first 5 years of marriage. It would be one thing if women were giving men 4+ children like they were 100 years ago, but on average, women give men 1 to 2 children. The other issue we have is sexless marriages. When we look at the boomer generation, 1/3 of them are in sexless marriages. Many men have reported that women stop sleeping with them after they have children. How many men would sign up for marriage if they knew that they no longer would have sex, their wives would no longer have sex with them? Now, while this is not the...
It's a valid point, honestly, because when you're married, obviously, it's a covenant under God that this is the only partner you'll ever have sex with for the rest of your life. So that's a good point that Pearl makes right here. If 1/3 of marriages, or according to her in the study, state that you can't go outside of marriage for sex, and your partner just denies you, that's a big problem. So I agree with her on this.
majority of those marriages, that is still not insignificant. Men are not even guaranteed an in-shape wife who sleeps with them. Now let's talk about the legal ramifications of marriage and family for men. I do not say this with a happy heart, but there is simply no legal way to stop a woman who wants to divorce you from doing so. My logic is quite simple. When you pay people to do the wrong thing, more people will do it, even seemingly good people. Unfortunately, men, the divorce system heavily benefits women, and the stats reflect that. Women file for divorce 70% of the time, and 73% of the time, the reason given is irreconcilable differences. This does not make sense considering people date on average 3 years before marriage. What differences did you not notice in those 3 years?
Okay, so right here, that's a really strange argument to say that what differences you notice in these 3 years. So things can come up in marriage that are red flags and can come up between like narcissists or people that hide things from their partner until they're married. So I don't agree with her that things aren't necessarily revealed until later. People can do a very good job of manipulating another person and hiding that information. But at the same time, it's a huge problem that over 70% of women are the ones that initiate divorce compared to men. That is a huge problem.
This makes sense considering the rising body counts and how promiscuous women are going into marriage. This is not only devastating to men, but also deadly. Men are 9 times more likely to commit suicide following a divorce. Child support is tied to Social Security and Title 4D, and if you cannot pay, the government can take away your money directly from your bank account, ruin your credit score, take away even your fishing license, take money directly from your paycheck, and even throw you in jail. The best interest of the child is a principle to ensure government policies safeguard the rights and holistic needs of children. It is standard used in family law to make decisions impacting a child in matters of adoption, child custody, guardianship, and visitation. This principle means that any situation should be looked at from the child's point of view. This sounds nice in theory, but this law is weaponized against men all across this country. This means the best interest of the child, even in cases where you are lied to about paternity. For example, in California, if you were on the child's birth certificate after the age of 2 and you were lied to about paternity, you are on the hook for child support for 16 years. There are many ways that women weaponize the family court in order to drain resources from men, but I'm going to list a couple I have seen. I have seen temporary restraining orders set to separate fathers from children. Men can be kicked out of the house they pay for on a moment's notice with a restraining order. In that time period between her filing it and going to court, the mother can put the father on child support because technically she is spending more time with the children. What is not considered is that the woman spent more time with the kids because she had not been letting the dad see them due to the restraining order. This is not illegal.
Wow, then that's really bad if that's true. Jeez.
For women to do, and there is no punishment. I interviewed one man in London who had spent over $100,000 fighting for his children and still had not seen them in 2 years. I interviewed another man whose wife tried to transition his kid without his permission. I interviewed another man
and I don't know if she's referring to the couple from Canada, but I know there was one, I believe it was a married couple or I don't know if they were divorced or not, but it was really terrible. Somewhere in Canada, they were, I believe they were married, so maybe not referring to what Pearl's talking about, but this married couple was trying to prevent their child from getting a transition because they didn't agree with it. But the government ruled in favor of the minor, some 15-year-old or 16-year-old, to get this horrible surgery that is going to ruin your life, most likely. And it's a minor. Like, it's unbelievable. But let's continue. I interviewed another man whose wife was trying to transition his kid without his permission. It took him 3 years and over $50,000 to get custody. Imagine if he did not have the money. Many men go into bankruptcy trying to fight for their children. A case I covered in the state of Chicago, a father had paid over $1 million to his ex-wife during a divorce and was still thrown in jail because he could not keep up with his $10,000 a month payment. The child support payment is calculated by current earnings, so if a man loses his job, which many do due to the stress of divorce, he is still on the hook for child support even if he cannot afford the money. Child support is given based on the amount of time that children that dads are given with the children, and that women have incentive to not give men access to their children and are rewarded for doing so. Many men in this process find themselves homeless because they cannot keep up with child support payments. The loss of a child is one of the leading indicators of mental illness. Many men that I have interviewed have compared this to death. Losing a child they would rather die than live a life without their children. And the stats show that many men pick death over this reality. Another thing that most do not know is that family court is not based on evidence, it's based on a balance of probabilities rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. This means it is easier to allege that a man abused you in family court without evidence. Mainstream cases like Amber Heard and Johnny Depp show just how easy it is for women to ruin a man's reputation with no evidence. Many times the women are actually given free. Yeah, I fully agree here with what Pearl states about the idea of one person's emotions taking complete control over the jury or anything like that. I mean, there's many cases of this where a baseball player was basically kicked out of the league, and a football player was even kicked out of the league because of these accusations of SA and Grape, and what happened was the accusations were false, and many of these people, they don't get their jobs back. They either go to jail and then they're released from jail, but they lose out on these opportunities that were God-given talents, like playing a sport or being skilled in any type of profession. So it's really terrible what happens here.
Resources from domestic abuse centers in order to assist women in this. In many areas, the courts have alleged that the definition of abuse has changed in the last 50 years to include things like emotional abuse, financial abuse, and have also changed the definition of rape from forced sex to sex without consent. The problem you get when you change these definitions to be more broad is that women are allowed to say things like yelling is abuse and he did not let me spend $5,000 on my credit card, therefore he is abusive. I have seen cases where men were accused of raping a woman the first time they hooked up and they were married 10 years after.
Which is insane. If that's crazy.
Women weaponize this against men. The problem you get with these definitions that are more broad, that women are allowed to abuse the system. As I said before, losing a child is like death to a lot of men. One area that we studied was veteran suicide. 44 veterans a day commit suicide, and over 400,000 men have died due to suicide in the last 25 years. To put it into perspective, since the Revolutionary War, 650,000 have died in battle. In 25 years, we have hit 2/3 of that. Terrence Popp has worked with veterans for 15 years, and through our personal research, have found that 70% of veteran suicides have come in contact with family court in the last 5 years. Family court is literally killing men every day and nobody is talking about it. On top of that, fathers have to watch their mothers raise children in a way that sets up their children for failure. Single mother homes account for 63% of youth suicides, 90% of the homeless and runaways, and the majority of school shooters, where single father homes fare similar to two parents homes.
This is one of the biggest things I think no one talks about, the idea of single mother homes and the children that they raise. And we see all the time in the news, like Kevin Durant or like these really popular celebrities that were raised in a single mother home, and they grow up to be very successful people, and that's true. They can grow up to be very successful people, but just as Pearl's saying, when there's depression, mental illness, people going to jail, people committing crimes, like all these things, and the majority of them are from single mother homes, that these horrible things are happening. We need to ask these questions. Why is this happening? Why do children have a much less fair chance of life when they're raised in a single mother home? And I think that's something that our society fails to ask. They pamper the issue down to pretending it doesn't exist. And it's a huge problem. It's a really big problem in our society today. And I think people need to have these hard discussions. It doesn't mean the woman is technically a bad person, but it's the absence of the father, or even that father figure, because not all fathers are morally great and all that. Like, of course not. But the absence of that is a big problem for children.
Personally, I've interviewed men who had to watch a mother try to transition their kid, and I had one case where a mother's new boyfriend had accusations of being a pedophile, and there was nothing the man could do. Let's go over this again. The upside is that men get a woman who has slept with at least 4 other men and maybe 2 children out of the deal. On average, the woman will be 170 pounds and 5'3". Odds are she at least likely has 1 tattoo, some debt, and maybe even a previous child in tow. The downside is you can lose half your assets, your children, your reputation, homelessness, and you can be put on child support, alimony, and even thrown in jail. Personally, I would never sign a business deal that encourages that kind of risk, but for whatever reason, men are encouraged to sign a business deal that does.
Okay. You literally finished with 1 second to spare. You crushed that. Well done.
Thank you.
For someone who's not used to time debates, you did really well. Okay. Trent, whenever you're ready, I'll click the 10-minute mark.
Excuse me. All right. Well, Pearl has the burden of showing that marriage is a bad deal for men, and all I have to do is show that she hasn't made her case. And notice in Pearl's opening statement, she never cites a study of married men in general to see whether they think marriage is a bad deal. So to show that she's wrong,
I think that's a really good point that Trent makes. She states all these statistics, and of course, stats, you can't lie with statistics, but you can be deceitful in many ways when you hide the fact of the demographic of men that are actually married, and studying that group, not just the people that are divorced, but the people in society that are remained in a marriage. They remain in a marriage right now. So I think it's a really good point that Trent makes that Pearl didn't address earlier.
I'm going to point out 3 fallacies that Pearl makes in her arguments. So first, there's the wrong target fallacy. For example, Pearl talks about how marriage is a bad deal because men are sometimes mistreated in child custody cases. That's not unique to marriage. If you cohabit or even just hook up with a woman, you can still father a child and deal with custody issues.
That's a really good point that Trent makes right here, especially because in in many states in the United States, especially when you're cohabitating with a partner, even if you're not legally married yet, when you cohabitate with a partner for at least I don't know, like a decade or 8 years, or depending on the state you're in, a lot of these legal ramifications come into effect, just as custody of kids, and your taxes. There's all these things that happen. So there's still legal ties of custody that come into play when it comes to a partnership that is not tied with marriage immediately yet.
However, marriage makes a man the presumed father of the child with natural rights unmarried fathers don't have, even though unmarried fathers can still be liable to pay child support. The children of unmarried men are 10 times more likely to be aborted. And if the child does survive the pregnancy, he's 3 to 6 times more likely to live in poverty. The hazards of unmarried, much less for married men. Another wrong target is women themselves. Pearl says marriage is bad for men because modern women are worse than previous generations of women. But that says nothing about marriage. If modern women are good enough for hookups that can result in children, or cohabiting relationships that superficially feel like marriage, but are far more likely to fail, then modern women are good enough for marriage, which has less harms for men. And Pearl can't use these stats to dunk on women because men are also worse than previous generations. Modern men are just as promiscuous and are even more overweight than modern women. A 2019 Experian study found that men carry more credit, auto, and mortgage debt than women. Millennial and
This is a great point that Trent makes right here, because this is something that men have failed at and taking responsibility. I mean, more women are going to college compared to men now, which is unheard of, because I mean, like 100 years ago, they're cooking, cleaning, being at home, being wives, stay-home mothers for the majority of them, and now it's like the opposite. And I think it's a bad thing, because not that every woman should never work, but if men are supposed to be the providers, the traditional breadwinners in a marriage, and the majority of them aren't going to college. Now, if they're going to trade school, or they're starting their own businesses and being successful with that, then fine. That's fantastic, because college is really overrated and way too expensive nowadays. So I understand that shift away from going to college. But like Trent's stating right here, when many men have more loans, more debt than women have, it's not that they're engaging in an entrepreneurial path that is more successful than going to college. It's that they're less responsible than many of the modern women today, which is why it's hard for women to pair bond and be married to certain men if they lack this responsibility of leading a household as they did back in the 70s and 60s and so on.
Gen Z men have weaker grip strength and make less money than older men did at their age.
And that's really important too right here. Like the grip strength, that's the decrease in testosterone that's affecting so many men today. That's a huge problem.
Pearl has not shown that women are not good enough for men. Instead, the data shows men and women are both in bad shape compared to previous generations. But there's hope. Marriage is the best way for men and women to mature together and bring out the best in one another. Second, there's the anecdote fallacy. One sad story about a marriage does not show marriage itself is bad, because for every sad story Pearl can bring up, I can statistically bring up 2 to 3 good stories about happy marriages.
I'm really glad I said this, because he read my mind what I said earlier. Like Pearl was stating about 100 interviews that she had on her own podcast, and every story is valid. I'm not going to say that one story is more true over another, but you cannot use that as a position of authority when making a statement about marriage as a topic of discussion. Studies and peer-reviewed research are the only forms of authority that you could use when debating a subject, not your own presumed opinion about interviews that you conducted from a first-person point of view. This is a really key point that Trent makes right here.
And there are many stories about sad, sick, lonely men who never marry. Pearl cannot prove her case with anecdotes. She needs actual data that proves married men are worse off than unmarried men, but no such data exists. Even marriage skeptics will only argue at best that marriage doesn't increase happiness. They all agree that men who marry are better off concerning health, wealth, and happiness than men who never marry. If Pearl can't provide peer-reviewed data to prove otherwise, then her...
So I wish Trent gave some more evidence here about this, but let's see if he gives evidence about that.
Case fails. Third, there's the comparison fallacy. Instead of stories involving the risks of marriage, Pearl oftentimes just points to the risks of marriage itself and says that's a good enough reason to not marry. She says, just as you wouldn't fly on a plane that has a 5% chance of crashing, you shouldn't get married, even if it has similar low odds of divorcing. But if you look at the worst outcomes of one choice while ignoring the worst outcomes of another choice, that's the comparison fallacy. It's like someone who thinks driving is safer than flying because they only read a bunch of stories about plane crashes and never think about car crashes. Of course, flying is far safer than driving, and marriage is less risky than non-marriage. You cannot compare the best outcomes of non-marriage to the worst outcomes of marriage. To be fair, you must compare the typical outcomes in both cases, be it flying versus driving or marriage versus non-marriage.
I think that's a really great point he makes right here. You have to compare the circumstance with another circumstance. You can't compare the extreme, unfortunate circumstances that occur with marriage, just like you can't compare car crashes with plane crashes, because a plane crash is way more devastating from the outside looking at it. But when you compare car crashes to plane crashes, car crashes overwhelmingly happen compared to plane crashes. It's not even close. But the fear is way more. There's much more anxiety and fear with planes because of the unresolved, unknown realities of what that could look like. I think that's a really great point that he makes.
And Pearl exaggerates the harms of marriage and ignores the harms of not marrying. For example, according to the National Center for Family and Marriage Research, the median length of all marriages is not 7 to 8 years, as Pearl often claims. That's the length of marriages that end in divorce, not all marriages. The median length for all marriages is 21 years. And the divorce rate is closer to 35%, not 50%. 50% was a future projection from the 80s that has since been falsified. In fact, we are now seeing the lowest divorce rates since 1970, about 14 divorces per 1,000 married women. For weekly churchgoers, the divorce rate is half the average rate. Also, just because 35% of marriages end in divorce, that doesn't mean you have a 1 in 3 chance of absolute misery. Divorce sucks, but people typically survive it intact. In fact, men do better than women after divorce. Men's income increases by 20% on average, while women are twice as likely to fall into poverty after divorce. Alimony is only paid out in less than 10% of divorces. And according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average child support payment is $441 a month, of which only 60% usually ends up getting paid. Moreover, women do not get child custody 90% of the time, as others claim. 95% of custody cases are mutually agreed upon outside of the courtroom. Women get full custody 40% of the time, men get full custody 20%, and shared custody makes up the remaining 40%. Women usually get full custody because men don't ask for it. In a Massachusetts study of 24,000 divorces, only 8% of men sought custody, and 94% of them got full or partial custody. Finally, a 2006 study in the journal...
Yeah, this is a really good point he makes right here, because he refuted that point from Pearl very excellently with stating that many men don't ask for custody. And not that that's every man, literally, but there's many cases of men that don't want to be involved in their child's life. And I think that's a huge problem, because if it's your own child, like, I don't know how that even happens to begin with, but that's a good point he makes right here.
Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health showed that while divorced men were 27% more likely to die prematurely, 58% of never married men were more likely to die early. Never married men risk growing older and having few or no social connections. Pearl can tell lots of horror stories, apparently, about men going through messy divorces. And my wife, who is a registered nurse, can tell you all kinds of horror stories about men dying alone in the hospital, spending every day by themselves, staring at the same blotch on the ceiling because they had no one to ever come and visit them. Now, some men desire marriage and are unable to find a wife, which is tragic. But rejecting marriage out of fear is like the person who refuses to go to the hospital because he worries about medical errors, but doesn't think about people dying at home from easily treatable illnesses. The comparison fallacy once again. That's probably why 65% of divorced men get remarried. 93% of men say they would marry their spouse again if they could do marriage over. If Pearl is right, as she said in the past, that marriage is a death sentence for men, then why do most men voluntarily go back to death row after they've been released, i.e. divorced? Well, it's because these men correctly identify...
That's a really good point. Because a lot of divorced men, even women, I think, too, but he's not stating women in this case, but a lot of divorced men do get remarried. But here's the thing that Trent doesn't bring up, and I think Pearl could probably bring this up in her rebuttal if she does. Many remarried people, they're much more, there's a higher likelihood of getting divorced. With, I believe some studies show that, like, the more times you remarry, the more times, the higher likelihood of the divorce. In fact, let me look it up right now, because I think there is data to support that. So if I go to here, let's see. So how likely is divorce after remarriage? So if I look right here, despite our common sense expectations, according to demographic data, the divorce rate is in fact significantly higher than that of the first marriages. So look at this, 5 reasons why second marriages might fail at a high rate. So this is according to finalpsychologist.org. Let's see. I don't want to spend too much time here looking for this, but in 1960, 47% of divorces were people remarried. So the divorce rate for second marriages in the United States is over 60% compared to around 50% for first marriages. It's right here. So it's always higher for second marriages, and there's more data on that, I believe. Why divorce partners end up remarrying each other. That's really fascinating to see. Right here, 2023, right here, Goldberg Jones website, 41% of first marriages end in divorce, 60% of marriages end in divorce in second marriages, and 73% of third marriages end in divorce. So it keeps going up when you divorce. So I think that's one thing that Trent needs to address right here, because just because divorced people remarry doesn't make his case strong, because there's a higher likelihood of divorce, and I think he's not addressing that right here.
By what Pearl has failed to grasp, marriage is not bad for men. It's not a bad deal for men. In fact, marriage is typically a good deal for men. It's no wonder God told Adam in the book of Genesis it's not good for man to be alone, and so he made Eve to remedy this problem. Now, to make it clear, it is a lie that half of all marriages end in divorce. The truth is that most marriages last a lifetime, and 80 to 90% of them identify as happy. A Gallup.
So I'm not sure what he's talking about, that it's a lie necessarily, but let's see if he makes his case more clearly.
Survey conducted between 2008 and 2020 of 800,000 adults showed that married people rate their well-being 12 to 17 points higher than unmarried people. The General Social Survey from the University of Chicago, a gold standard in sociological research, shows that married men are twice as likely to rate their lives as very happy when compared to non-married men. And the majority of married men, in fact, I'd say 80% of them, identify themselves as happy. Married men also make 10 to 20% more money per hour, and they have more sex than never married men. Pearl says that men face sexless marriages, but the General Social Survey shows that unmarried men are twice as likely to have a sexless life than a married man.
That's a good point that he makes right here, because with today, like, the marriage rates they're in decline in the modern age, and the amount of sexless men today, according to Pew Research, is very high. In fact, let's look it up right now. I can try to find it real quick. So let's see. So young men sexless. I'm gonna go look up marriage, but let's see. Why are so many young males single and sexless? So it says right here that it's a much bigger problem just having sex in general, not just the marriage part. Recent Pew, from about a year ago, recent Pew research indicates that over 60% of young men are currently single. Over 60%. Sexual intimacy is at a 30-year low across genders, which explains the huge decrease in childbearing and all that. When men are having sex, obviously children can't be born. So it's right here. I mean, not only did I just read that? Yeah, 30-year low right here. So it's a huge problem, having sex for men. It's a huge decline in it, and the idea of their wives and PORN is a huge problem. Social media. So I think this idea of this rise in sexual access to corn. I just don't want to say the term because I don't want to get in trouble, but with the live stream and everything, or the video in general, but the rise in that's going on, it's a distraction for people to have this fantasies and not engage with the opposite sex, which is why so many men are afraid to even talk with women. I can't tell you when I was at college and I would say, hey bro, like, let's talk to that girl that you like, and he would just say, oh, I'm going to DM her, and not actually speak to her and have an interaction, because it causes a lot of anxiety and fear. And this is what happens because of that. Because of this, when you're only looking at porn and you're only looking at things online, there's more likelihood for psychogenetic related erectile dysfunction, delayed ejaculation, and diminished libido in men under 40 years old, because you're supposed to take action and initiate conversations with women that you're attracted to, not hide behind a screen. So I can go on and on about this, but by any means, let's get back to the video right here.
Don't get married. But when you look at I'd say these studies only prove that happier, richer men get married, and unhappy, poor men don't get married. But when you look at the typical married man, he is not a 6'2" rich Chad. Moreover, if a man chooses to marry, then he needs to become marriageable, which involves developing positive traits that both make him desirable to women and improve his own self-esteem at the same time.
That's a really good point he makes. Like, some of the positive traits is working harder, making more money, being physically fit, having good social cues, having charm and a good personality. So like, these things are what many women find attractive with men. Flirting, all these things. And these are positive things, because what happens if you have no interest in gaining attraction for the opposite sex, and you just want to stay in your room and just watch porn and have all that stuff at your disposal? You have no reason to really improve yourself and improve your skill set, other than just simply for selfish means of only giving yourself big points, and you're not serving God's purpose, in my opinion, when you're simply just working for yourself only and just looking to your own skill for your own well-being, and not in an unselfish manner.
But I'm not arguing that marriage makes people happy. I'm arguing against Pearl's claim that marriage is a bad deal for men and steals their happiness. That's just not true. In fact,
Right. That's a good point he makes right here, too.
marriage is the best. You can't interrupt when I'm talking.
You get a 5 minute after this. He's got 1 minute.
Oh, sorry.
You're okay.
There will be time. I'm excited for that.
Okay.
In fact, marriage is the best way for men to not just hang on to happiness, but to increase it. The Harvard study of adult development, which tracked people for 80 years, said good relationships were the #1 predictor of happiness. And it showed that men who married ended up happier and lived 7 to 17 years longer than men who never married. And that's a study for people over 80 years of their life.
That's a great point that he makes right here, because obviously the topic of this debate is marriage bad for men? And when you look at the data and the statistics, according to this study that he made, a reputable study of over 80 years, or at least 80 years of tracking adults, relationships, many psychology studies show this. Relationships are a big determining factor when it comes to happiness and stability. I mean, I literally know some people, some friends of mine, that, and even my current spouse, or not spouse to be, they find themselves being very lonely when they're living alone. And living alone, it can be a good thing for learning skills and being responsible and all that. If you have the means to do it, it's great. But you are very lonely if you don't have a relationship that is important in your life, and that's usually romantic relationships, because as more people get married or become more intimate with their partner, their friendships kind of take a decline, and that's a natural thing, because you're going to spend less time with friends naturally. So yeah.
When I was unmarried, let me actually go through here. Well, yeah, when I was unmarried, I thought that having 2 folding chairs and a TV on the ground were appropriate living room furniture. But when you're married, your wife shows you something better, and she roots for you. A 2013 Harvard study showed that married men are less likely to get cancer, and married men are even more likely to survive cancer, showing that marriage is a good deal for men. So finally, I'd be remiss to point out, neither men nor women invented marriage. God invented marriage. He gave it to the human race. Christ raised it to the level of a sacrament.
Amen. Hallelujah. Praise be to God for that. That is 100% true. And I think you have to look at marriage in the lens of God providing that for us, by the grace of God, we're provided in marriage, and it's a blessing. It's an absolute blessing to have that.
And Pearl would have to give overwhelming data to show that something that God gave us is actually a bad deal for men. And she won't be able to do that because the data doesn't support that. Indeed, for most men, marriage is the primary engine that helps them live a long, healthy, and happy life.
This time. All right. Good job, Trent. You have a 5-minute rebuttal, Pearl, whenever you're ready.
Wait, so how does do I ask him questions
No,
during the rebuttal?
that'll be after the break. This is basically your time, 5 minutes. He won't be able to interrupt you. You can try to refute the case he just made.
Got it. Okay.
So, and would it help you if you saw the time?
Yeah, sure.
Do you mind putting that there? Just so
I didn't know that was there.
Yeah, that's his phone. But whenever you're ready.
Okay. One thing I noticed in your arguments is that you constantly attribute all of the positive things that happen in marriage. You just automatically attribute them to women. You automatically attribute them to that marriage is the cause. I would disagree with that.
Okay, let's see if Pearl explains why she disagrees with it.
I would say it's a bad deal because at the end of the day, women are paid to leave. You never addressed any.
Okay, so right here, Pearl never actually addressed the premise of her accusation that marriage is not the cause of the happiness, when he gave many very verified studies of this.
Solutions that you have. What solutions does the church have? Women don't want to be married. Men cannot make women marry that do not want to be married.
And time.